Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that short coffee break and some time to network as well. Welcome also to everyone joining us for the live stream via the Hoover app. Our next and final session for day 2 is entitled The Role of Distributed Energy Resources, DER, and Energy Efficiency to Meet Energy Transition Goals. I'd like to introduce you firstly to our moderator for this discussion, Shafiqul Alam, IEEFA's lead energy analyst, Bangladesh. May I invite him to take the stage? Mr. Alam is joined by panelist Jay Gordon, an energy finance analyst for the Australian electricity sector at IEEFA, Jyoti Gulia, founder and research director and JMK Research and Analytics, Kondakar Gholam Moazzam, research director for the Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh. And our panel is rounded off with Muhammad Mustafa Amjad, program director of Renewables First. I think we all are aware of the drill by now. Please submit all your questions for the panel via the Hoover app. Shafiq, it's all yours. Take it away.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to invite you all to the day's last session, that is on distributed energy resources and energy efficiency and their role to achieve the energy transition goals. To provide you a little background on that, you are aware of the fact that the 28th Conference of the Parties that ended last year actually enhanced the ambition on renewable energy and energy efficiency. The goal was enhanced to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030 and also to double the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. However, while the goals are fantastic on paper, there are challenges on the ground. For instance, different countries, they experience land scarcity. There are fragmented land ownership, which affect renewable energy capacity expansion, particularly the utility scale renewable energy. And there is also the grid constraints. So all these limit the expansion of renewable energy in different countries. On the other hand, if you can recall, in the morning, Dr. Arunava mentioned economic growth throughout the world actually is mainly driven by the economic growth of Asian region. Particularly 60% of the economic growth is happening in this region. However, it also accounts for roughly more than 70% of emission. So what do we need? We need to actually decouple the economic growth from energy consumption. We need to restrict the growing trajectory of GHG emission. And this calls for enhancing energy efficiency across different economic activities and also on the household levels. However, there are challenges. For instance, lack of policy, sometimes lack of awareness, lack of capacity, and several other factors that actually impede the implementation of energy efficiency in different sectors. And here comes the place of distributed energy resources and energy efficiency. Actually, the role of distributed energy resources and energy efficiency often are less discussed in achieving energy transition goal. And that's why the session is about the role of distributed energy resources and energy efficiency to attain the energy transition goal. To know more about that, we have 4 experts. Jay Gordon from Australia is the Australian electricity sector analyst from IEEFA. Then we have Jyoti Gulia from India, CEO, JMK Analysis. Dr. Kondakar Gholam Moazzam from Center for Policy Dialogue, Bangladesh. And then we have Mustafa Amjad from Pakistan, Renewables First. He is the research director there. So now to discuss on different aspects of distributed energy resources and energy efficiency, first I would like to call upon Jay Garden. So Jay, you have recently conducted several studies on distributed energy resources and energy efficiency from Australian perspective, and we have seen quite fantastic results. And particularly one thing we got, that got the significant attention is the all-electric home. So could you please explain us what do you mean by the all-electric home, and what are the economics behind that all-electric home concept? And also, to add on that, what role distributed energy resources can play in that so-called all-electric home?
So the context of that analysis is that in Australia, we're very fortunate that the majority of households are connected to a centralised electricity grid, and in many regions, those households are also connected to a reticulated gas supply, so fossil gas. And when we talk about moving towards all-electric homes, it's really about getting to a situation where those households no longer need access to that gas supply and can meet all of their energy needs through electricity. So to get into the economics of that, there's a bit of history, particularly in a few regions of Australia, where there's been long-standing access to very cheap supplies of domestic gas that's produced locally, and that's led to those regions, including Victoria, down in the south where I'm from, where homes are very reliant on that gas for heating in particular, and also hot water, as it's previously seen as a very cheap source of energy. But we've seen some pretty major shifts in the gas market in Australia. So one is that, as we've discussed in some of the sessions over this conference, Australia has of course emerged as a major gas exporter, as LNG. And this means that our domestic users are now paying prices that are linked to the international market, so no longer accessing that cheap supply of gas. And a lot of those previously accessible cheap reserves of gas locally are being depleted. Now, at the same time, we've seen quite a rapid evolution in the renewable energy transition in Australia, as renewables have become more cost-effective and are entering the system. And similarly, we've had some pretty significant developments in efficient electric appliances, such as heat pumps being made available for hot water systems, and of course reverse cycle air conditioners. And so all of this is leading to a situation where the economics of gas versus electricity have quite fundamentally shifted, and electricity, when used with efficient appliances, is now far more cost effective in Australian homes. And we did a particular piece of analysis that looked at the fact that we estimate there's around 800,000 gas appliances that are still being installed in homes in Australia. And if we compare what the lifetime costs of those are, including just the upfront and then also the running costs over the lifetime of those appliances, those households are actually locking in a cumulative approximately $800 million worth in unnecessary costs for every year they buy those appliances. So there's really a compelling case for shifting towards more efficient electric appliances. In terms of how DER can help in that situation, I think I'd focus on two ways. So the first is that, quite simply, it's probably the more obvious situation, which is that as more households take up rooftop solar and increasingly residential batteries as well, they're obviously in a position where they can utilise more of their own energy if they can switch all of their energy sources to electricity. And of course, the electricity they can produce from their own rooftop solar panels is going to be more cost effective than what they can purchase from the grid. And now it's a very significant opportunity in the Australian context, given we're now at a point where around 30% of households in Australia have rooftop solar. And in some states, it's actually much higher. It's over 40%, and we're seeing some states where you can get instantaneous periods now, when the conditions are right, where the entire state's electricity demand is met by rooftop solar alone. So it's really, really significantly growing energy source, and one that I think will significantly shift the dial on the economics of going to all-electric homes. And we're also seeing some states looking now at providing subsidies for residential batteries, which, of course, if that can be cost-effective for households, that's an even better situation because you consume more of your own solar energy at more times of the day. But the other example I'll draw on is the fact that many of these efficient electric appliances we're talking about could actually be considered forms of DER themselves. And I think the best example of this is actually domestic hot water systems. And so our research finds that the most cost-effective way to heat hot water in Australia is via a heat pump hot water system So this is a heat pump unit attached to a storage tank, and you can actually heat that water at any time of the day to draw on as needed. And that means you can effectively use a hot water system as a form of energy storage. Except rather than storing electrons, you're storing heat in the water. And so that means, and we've done a bit of research with some of our guest contributors in our team that look at the fact that domestic hot water is actually one of the largest sources of flexible demand that's likely to be available in the grid in the near future. And that more flexible, efficient use of hot water can not only reduce costs for households, but also reduce costs for all end users in the system, because you're doing things like utilising more of your existing infrastructure and avoiding increases in peak demand. So some really significant opportunities there.
Thanks, Jay, for the excellent insight. But I have a follow-up question to that. As you have mentioned that the number of solar systems are increasing, and also there's a battery storage system. One thing is there any impact on the grid? I mean, as the systems are increasing. On the other hand, with the battery, I mean, what is the economics? As we have mentioned already, that 800 million, that's a saving, that's a compelling economic case. But when at the individual level, I mean, that saving may be because of gas saving and others, but at the individual level, when I consider myself as a consumer, if I use as rooftop solar and then battery, how economic is that there compared to, let's say, gas?
Yeah. So for the first part of that question, impacts on the grid, I think it's an interesting one because I think there are a lot of sort of misconceptions sometimes about what the impacts are, or different perceptions of sort of how severe they are and how they can be managed. But I think one thing we're learning in Australia is that there are ways you can probably integrate more DER onto the grid with better forms of regulation and technical standards. And so one example of that is in the case of our state with the highest uptake of rooftop solar, South Australia. What originally was happening is that households were installing, in some cases, quite large solar systems on their roof, but the electricity network was imposing an export limit of sort of 5 kilowatts on that system. So I think particularly in the early days of solar uptake in Australia, a lot of users were sort of looking to make an income by exporting a lot of that solar back to the grid, but a lot of that was being curtailed by that export limit. So what the distribution network looked at is, well, actually, there are different times of the day where we think we might actually be able to export more of that power because the grid is less constrained or demand is lower. And they've introduced what's called a dynamic operating envelope, which means that the amount that can be exported from your solar system actually varies throughout the day. It's not just fixed at a 5 kilowatt limit. And I think they did this with the expectation that there might be a somewhat high percentage of the day where we can increase that export limit. They actually found that I think the statistic is around 98% of the time they were able to double that export limit to 10 kilowatts. So that's an example where a more innovative solution can really help to integrate DER into the grid. And of course, I think really the end goal here is better, more efficient use of that existing infrastructure. So where we tend to have these electricity demand profiles that are very peaky, with demand peaking particularly on very hot summer days when everyone has their air conditioning running, but other periods where demand is quite low. So the more we can do to even out that demand profile, such as by using flexible demand sources like hot water systems, in the future it will be things like electric vehicles and making sure they're charging at sensible times of the day. There are definitely ways we can ease those impacts on the grid. In terms of the second question around the economics of batteries, I think this is still a bit of an emerging space because we're at a point in time where I think right now for a consumer to go out and buy a battery, it is very expensive and it is quite hard to make a return. But we are seeing very rapid costs rapid cost reductions in batteries coming through. And it will be very interesting to see what the impact of some of the upcoming policy announcements are in different Australian states, which are bringing in subsidies for household batteries. And we've certainly seen that some of those subsidy programs really helped accelerate rooftop solar uptake in Australia and helped kickstart that industry and get us to the point now where even though those subsidies are reducing, the costs have also reduced and it's still very economical for consumers. So At the moment, it's challenging, but I think it'll be a matter of watching this space and also sort of seeing, what we can do in terms of regulations to make sure users can get the most out of those batteries, like by exporting more energy to the grid and those sorts of things.
Thanks. Yes, a lot more policy support regulations that will be very important to make the things even economically viable. So now I'd like to call upon Jyoti. India has done really well in terms of renewable energy capacity expansion. And then also it has quite a big target, like 500 gigawatt by 2030. And then, in fact, I read from your study last year, in the last fiscal year, India had a record 4 gigawatt installation of rooftop solar. And now, what role do you foresee the role of rooftop solar you can foresee in India's energy transition goal? And what kind of incentives actually Indian government is providing to upscale rooftop solar, commercial and industrial? And yeah, just to learn some lessons from you for other countries.
Thanks, Shafiqul, and the IEEFA team for inviting us for this panel discussion today. So as per what we estimate, Shafiqul, we expect the decentralized renewable energy systems, including rooftop solar, are likely to contribute about 15 to 20% of the overall RE target of India by 2030. So what we are seeing in the rooftop solar side, I will mainly talk about here. In the CNI sector is at a mature phase here in India, so there are no as such incentives that are provided. Instead, incentives are provided for residential and agri consumers. So there is a unique situation with India compared to other developed countries where residential rooftop solar the share is higher. In India, the share of CNI is higher and residential is very less because residential and agriculture consumers are subsidized and instead a cross-subsidy surcharge is imposed on CNI consumers, making the electricity tariffs from them at a higher rate compared to the other categories, which makes rooftop solar system an economically viable solution for them. And with every year, the grid tariffs are also increasing by 1 to 2%, that the historical trend we have seen. And while the technology costs are falling, so even the payback period for a CNI consumer, it's very less. So there are no as such incentives on this side. However, on the subsidized segments, which is residential and agriculture segments in India, the government has come up with various programs historically also. Right now, the two programs that are most often talked about and which are in progress. For the residential consumer, there is a PM Surya Ghar Yojana scheme as part of, which is recently announced actually in February of 2024, and it needs to be implemented by March 2027, as part of which 10 million households are targeted where rooftop solar needs to be installed, and 30 gigawatt of capacity is likely to be estimated. So as part of this program, what government has done, two interesting things. So one, they have come up with they have digitized the whole system. They have digitized and reduced the implementation hurdles in a say, and have come up with a national rooftop portal where all the applications are managed. So instead of taking approvals at a state level, the government has make a centralized unified mechanism, online mechanism to take care of it. And as part of this program, the upfront capital subsidies provided to the residential consumers, depending on various system sizes that are there. So, and it has seen a good progress, I would say, interesting progress we are seeing as per what we have aware, 1 CR plus of applications are already being received as part of this. The second interesting program that the government is running is on the agriculture consumers, which is PM Kusum scheme. So again, as part of, there are different components to that scheme. There is a huge outlay that is planned as part of those scheme. And 2-3 main things that are targeted under that, where, they want to switch the diesel pumps to solar pumps, both the standalone pumps as well as the grid-connected pumps. And secondly, the farmer also has an option to set up a plant of up to 2 megawatt capacity on their agricultural land and can earn revenue out of that. This scheme was implemented in 2019. It's still running. But in terms of various components, the major success that we have seen is on the standalone solar pumps installations. So there the almost 31% of target is achieved there. So broadly, this is how India has evolved.
You have mentioned that they are earning revenues, right? The PM Kusum program through that. So if it is the case of, for example, solar irrigation, right? So they don't need to irrigate their land throughout the year, right? So what happens during the idle period? Is it directly connected to the grid so that they can sell electricity to the government?
Yes, it is connected to the grid. The plants are connected to the grid, and there is a tariff of almost 3 rupees per unit, INR per unit, that is given to the farmer for this.
Okay. And another thing in Bangladesh particularly, we see that there is a lot of resistance from the utilities for rooftop solar and solar irrigation, because if these are connected to the grid and then they'll lose their revenue. So how do you see that in India?
It's actually opposite in India. So utilities are reluctant towards CNI consumers. There are a lot of restrictions on the CNI consumers for shifting towards rooftop solar, because they are they are the high-paying consumers there. Discoms are more than happy for the residential and agri consumers to switch in, because their subsidy burden is reduced. So utilities in Discoms are also, I would say, loss-making entity, majority of them. So in every few years, government comes up with a financial package, reform packages to make them, sustainable here. So Discoms are, pro about switching for residential and agri consumers. However, there are a lot of restrictions. Net metering, which is, systems are allowed. They are, in a lot of states for CNI consumers, that is not allowed. Even the system limit size was 1 megawatt, that has been reduced to 500 kilowatt in a lot of states. Some big industrial states have also imposed additional grid surcharges for the CNI consumers. So the situation is different in India. And of course, I think on the residential and agriculture side, the implementation is a huge challenge, I would say. And second biggest challenge is the financing, the high cost of financing. Banks are very reluctant to finance. Even with the upfront capital subsidy, you cannot fund the complete system. So banks are very reluctant to support that. So that's the case in India.
So thanks for bringing the issue of finance. I will come back to you soon. Now, my question is to Dr. Khandekar Ghulam Mojjem. So, you are aware that actually Bangladesh installed more than 6 million solar home systems, and it actually reached the saturation level in 2022 when the government announced the 100% electricity access. So, it played its role in economic transformation, particularly in rural off-grid areas during 2003 to 2018. But do you see solar home system has any additional role in Bangladesh electricity system in the future? Also, Bangladesh has 1.3 million diesel run.
Can I just answer the first question first?
Yes.
I think. No, thank you at first to IEEFA to inviting me to this very important conference. And it's my pleasure to meet with the colleagues, learned colleagues, and I attended various sessions to learn myself and enrich myself on various issues. Yes, the solar home system that Bangladesh implemented during late 1990s to 2020 or 2021 is the largest of its kind worldwide. And there were quite a success in terms of implementing such a system in the country. In fact, this was happened in such a critical time while there are demand side factors as well as the supply side issues and supply side factors. And at the same time, when we say that after 2021, it has found to be in a period of a saturation, that also is related to another kinds of demand side factors and supply side factors that has made it difficult to further expand. So while we consider, or while we thought that whether any future opportunities are there, then we need to actually understand that what are the demand side factors that contributed and what are the demand side and supply side factors that has affected adversely, and how to address those factors in the changing context. In fact, during the late 1990s and early 2000, Bangladesh's power and energy sector, or overall Bangladesh's energy infrastructure was in a very, very poor and a shabby state. At that time, per capita electricity availability during 2002 was only 147 kilowatt hour. So you can easily imagine that how poor the electricity supply at that time. And almost over 50% of the overall Bangladesh's area were out of grid network. So that is another factor that also adversely affected at that time. And overall grid-based electricity during that time was only 4,000 megawatt. So under such a poor state, of course, electricity was somewhat considered to be a luxury product to the rural people. So, making such a luxury product and converting into an essential one is the success. And how that has been done. Of course, from the rural people side, they are also not in a position and haven't have that affordability during that time. And that time, the per capita income for the overall Bangladesh's people in 2002 was only $147. So you can easily imagine that how poor our economic state during that time. But even then, under such a scenario, it was found to be successful. How? And that happened because of a very successful kinds of a fiscal, financial, and a management-related practice, where all kinds of factors have actually combinedly done a very good initiative that time. On the one hand, you are aware that microfinance was quite popular even today. That was one of the basic benchmark available in the rural areas that time. And Gramin Shakti, which is called a rural energy, is one of the enterprise that has been launched in 1996 by the renowned Professor Yunus, who is now the chief advisor of Bangladesh. And that was the starting point that time. And that benchmark was used by financiers like MDBs, like World Bank, and other financing organizations like United UN Environment Finance, UNEF, then other organizations like ADB, GIZ, KFW, and other the financing organizations also come forward. And they have provided concessional loan, as well as they have provided grants. And that also made it at a very cheaper and an affordable level, make it available to the rural people. And how that has been done, it was provided to the Bangladesh, to the government, and that has been actually transferred to a very newly created organization, public-private entity, which is called IDCOL, IDCOL, Infrastructure Development Company Limited. It's a non-bank financial institute, and that has very successfully implemented during that time with the support of partner organizations, which called NGOs or the CSOs who are working at the rural areas. And that has made a very well organized and successfully they have monitored, they have provided discounted loan with a very small amount of initial payment, and with very flexible terms of conditions for repaying back the remaining amount. So these were the reasons that was actually made it successful. But that support was, that time of early 2000, was found to be quite valuable because of the overall economic situation and overall energy availability in the rural areas. And that provided the rural households very basic kinds of electricity supply for their rural use. For example, 2-3 lights, 1 fan, or some other electricity-based appliances that they could actually do with that limited support. But at the same time, it is true that over time, Bangladesh's economic condition has improved, And gradually, what happened is that it has expanded, and gradually it has reached its peak in 2022, and when around 6 million households has received its benefits. And at one point in 2016, it has provided support to about 12% of the rural households. So you can easily imagine how expansive the program were and how beneficial that was. But at the same time, as I told you, is that overall economic condition has improved, and as well people's purchasing capacity has increased, and as well as their demand has also changed. And they are not actually, at some stage, are not only keeping their demand only on 2 lights, 1 fans. Rather, their demands has further extended with freeze, air conditioners, electric vehicles, then mobile chargers. All are electric appliances now you can find in the rural households. So that additional the demands are unable to provide by this limited scale solar home system. So what I told you is that the demand side reasons are again the reason for its slowing down purpose is that reason, that people's purchasing capacity has improved, expectation has improved, not that they are actually expecting some 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt or 50 megawatt of electricity with a dimmed color, not of full scale electricity or the light available in the house. That demand has changed over time. And at the same time, the supply side issues also changed. How? Is that government has, over time, its capacity, its revenue increased, it has its capacity to invest in the rural infrastructure, including transmission, the distribution system has increased, and gradually it has extended its transmission network across the country. And at this moment, 100% of Bangladesh's area are electrified and under the grid. So that also has a reason that while the grid-based electricity is available with all kinds of demand to be met by the grid support, then the people are not so much interested to keep their demand only on the solar home system. Though it was earlier agreed that government grid network will not expand to the solar home areas, but the government didn't keep that promise. Government rather expanded across, and that also adversely affected the solar home-based facilities. Though we said that the 6 million households have that network of solar home system, but actually, truly speaking, it is 2 million only who are using at this moment the solar home facility. So under such a scenario, and another reason is that the cost and household in the rural area needs only several dollars, I think $150 or less, I think they need to get a grid connection. Or maybe, I'm sorry, it's not $60 and $10. It's only $70 is required to get a grid connection. On the other hand, if he likes to get a similar kinds of facility from the solar home-based system, he needs to invest over, I think, 250 or more need to invest, though it is paid in installments. So there is an economic judgment as well, not to keep their system, their electricity supply based on solar home system. So if we really like to change it, we need to consider these new realities. So how to actually make this solar home system much more attractive, commercially viable, and economic return-oriented one. So that we need to actually thought of. So my suggestion is that I have 2-3 suggestions. First is that solar home system still found to be viable because there are some remote areas in Bangladesh. Those who are new Bangladesh's the map, you know that there are some remote hilly areas where the grid is not yet actually reached. So those parts are still use the solar home system, and that's still reasonable for them to use. And also there are areas which we call the riverbank areas, which are much more remote from the grid network. So they also use the solar home system. So those areas, I think, will continue to use these kinds of solar home system in the coming days. But for the mass level use, if we like to make it again an alternative, we need to thought of some new and innovative way. First, I think you know it very well that solar home system is a DC system, direct current system. I think it needs to be converted into AC system, alternate current system.
What it make it attractive? If we make it an AC system, then it can be connected to the national grid. So while it would be in the national grid, and if it is if it has been allowed to use it for net metering system, so that these people can use their own purpose, as well as an additional amount they could sell to the national grid, and they could get benefit. So that this way they could find it a commercially and economically viable alternative, not alternative, viable option along with the national grid, which could actually pursue them to continue using it. Another thing is that the terms and conditions to be much more flexible and commercially attractive vis-a-vis those of the national grid one. So how it is to be done, it depends on the financier, depends on the supporters. Only the concessional finance is not adequate enough. So how to make it much more attractive vis-a-vis those of the simple grid connection for the rural households, that is another issue to be thought of. So I think that it is not fully an issue that it cannot be used. If we could actually thought of like Indian case, as it has been said, that if we can give them net metering opportunities, or if we could actually provide them other kinds of supports and incentives, definitely I think solar home system could persist along with those of the grid-based system. So these are my observations.
Yeah, thanks. That's a history of solar home system in Bangladesh, and actually that had played a significant role in Bangladesh's economic transformation, particularly in rural areas. In fact, 20 million people were served by solar home system until 2021. And the program has been highly praised across the globe for its impacts. Thank you for that. So I will now call upon Mr. Mustafa Amjad. So recently, what I have experienced, throughout the media reports that rooftop solar is gaining traction in Pakistan. And only in the last 6-7 months or 1 year, drastic changes happened. So, what are the key forces, key factors that are driving this shift in momentum? Particularly 1 year back, there were a lot of issues with energy pricing and other issues due to import dependence, highly import dependence. And what are the factors that are driving this transition? And do you think whether Pakistan will be able to capitalize on this, given that the challenges that the country faced in the last 2 to 3 years?
Well, thank you so much for that, Shafiq. And to put the question into context, for those of you who are not aware, so there was a Bloomberg report that came out probably, their outlook for Q3 for Pakistan, which stated that, some 12 gigawatt of solar panel have been imported into Pakistan from China. And to put that into perspective, that's a huge quantum of solar panels. It essentially makes Pakistan the 6th largest market for solar panels across the globe. It's the 3rd largest importer for China in terms of solar panels. So and to put that into more context, we're talking about a country where the total installed capacity is somewhere around 46 gigawatt. The peak summer demand is around 30 gigawatt, and the peak winter demand is around 20 gigawatts. So we're talking about 1/3 of the total installed capacity being imported as solar panels, and none of it is going at the utility scale. At the utility level, there is only 0.65 gigawatt of installation. That's a meager number compared to what people are now setting up in terms of rooftop, in terms of CNI, in terms of agriculture. And it's a perfect play of, a push and pull in terms of market. So essentially, I've been hearing the other examples, and I think it's very similar in Pakistan as well, where the push is essentially our location with respect to China and the relationship that we have. So there are a lot of opponents of the race to zero when it comes to, solar panels and production, but countries like Pakistan will always end up benefiting as long as you have the right incentives available in terms of the local market. and that is exactly what has materialized. So solar panels are available at a very cheap rate in Pakistan. There are no taxations on the import of solar panel from China. And what that means is that there's a lot of dumping of solar panels happening in Pakistan, given China's overcapacity. And it makes a lot of sense for, the residential consumers, or for that matter, even the industrial consumers, to shift towards renewable, basically solar energy. And that's on the push side. Let's not, to put this into context, China is responsible for almost 40% annual installations in terms of solar capacity across the globe. That was IEA back in January. And obviously, on the flip side, in Pakistan, the push factor is essentially, the pull factor essentially is that, the electricity tariffs are so high. We are talking about some of the highest tariff in the region, where it ranges from around 12 cents to 15 cents for different consumers. And the tariff is also, piggybacked with almost 20% of taxation, essentially because electricity is a good modem for the government to collect taxes. You can always, vouch on people paying their bills, so that's a good way of, collecting taxes as well. So all of that kind of meant that for different classes, it made total sense to shift away from the grid. Or to, reduce the reliance on the grid. And the reason for this, again, is that the utility kind of chose not to buy into the solar narrative. So back in 2016, 2017, under the CPEC, we started setting up imported coal power projects. Pakistan's coal fleet is very young. It's less than 10 years old. We started setting up imported RLNG projects, given the favorable market conditions back in, 2017. And we're talking about almost 63% thermal dependency right now for the utilities. And these are all young projects that have to repay their debts. These are essentially capacity payment bound, foreign currency indexed projects. And all of that will have to be recovered from the consumers at the utility scale. So that kind of leads to very high tariffs. And for people, so let's talk about all of the consumer segments. So if you're a residential consumer, your payback period for a net metered system in Pakistan on average would be somewhere around 2 to 3 years. And that's not even a huge investment when it comes to, some of the benefits that you can reap out of it, essentially improving your quality of life and, getting better usage out of electricity, as is the case in other South Asian countries as well. And then if you are a CNI consumer, it makes total sense for those that have day operations to not depend on the grid and to reduce their dependency on the grid to set up solar systems. Industry has their own incentives. So obviously with carbon border adjustment mechanism coming into effect, with more pressures in terms of export-oriented industry, there's this whole narrative of industry, especially those that have an export-oriented orientation, shifting on captive generation through renewable energy. And then again, you want the grid to be reliable, you want the grid to be affordable, you want the grid to be sustainable. And unfortunately, Pakistan's grid is neither of those three, right? So if you're an industrialist, you would rather have your own setup. It was an open competition between setting up a gas power project or a renewable energy project. But of late, given that there is a lot more drive for sustainability, there is that stick in terms of getting industry to do more in terms of sustainability. So it makes a lot of sense for them to also set up solar power projects. And then on the agriculture side as well, I think it's very important to understand, because you can see some of the market signals very clearly in the agriculture sector. So for the Pakistan State Oil last fiscal year, the sale of diesel basically went down by 18%. And that kind of highlights where all of those solar panels that are being coming through China are going to. I can, again, debate that 12, 13 gigawatt number. I'm sure it's not that high, but even at half of that, it's a huge quantum of solar panels, essentially, that will have to be deployed, or that are being deployed, but aren't really necessarily being deployed at the grid level. So on that note, I think it's very important to understand that, there's this whole shift happening in Pakistan. I can give you more examples of indicators. So with tube wells as well, we have more than 1.5 million solar tubes installed in Pakistan, and a lot of those are now shifted to solar energy, and this is without any government incentives. Those are coming in place now. So coming back to Shafiq's point about is it sustainable, or is it just going to be another solar coaster of sorts that we see across the globe? There is enough appetite in terms of market. I think there is enough conversations happening. The government has political slogans were made prior to the election about giving away free solar home systems to all those users that are using less than 100 units. So that's another whole avenue. Then there are solarization drives happening at the government level where they want to solarize all government buildings, all government schools and whatnot. So all of that still has to happen. But again, it's market at play essentially. If you have to pay 14 to 15 cents to buy electricity off the grid, you'll rather make the investment and get rid of the grid entirely. And with batteries prices falling, and again, Pakistan's proximity to China, it would again be a wonderful market for us, or a wonderful place to be at in terms of just shifting away entirely from the grid. But then, in terms of the crisis, is this going to solve Pakistan's problems? It kind of exacerbates it for the grid. It is great for the consumer, right? But in terms of utility, this essentially means that your role needs to change. And we already saw some of the examples that are happening in India, that are happening in Australia. So there is no ancillary markets, services market in Pakistan. The grid's role will have to shift towards that. Pakistan is also trying to privatize its distribution companies. We're trying to move away from a vertically integrated system to a competitive market. So all of that needs to factor in these very democratized, distributed systems. And that changes the whole landscape. That changes the whole orientation of how a grid company is run or how a utility is run. And I think that's where the utility needs to, adapt, or otherwise it will continue. The utility debt spiral will just continue, making it worse, because the capacity payments are not going away. The circular debt is approaching rupees 5.5 trillion now for the power sector. That's not going away. And then obviously, the prices are, again, dependent on imported fuel. So unless you start talking about early retirements on the grid, our modeling work shows you don't need to even add any more capacity for the next 10 years at the grid, because there's enough appetite in terms of TRE. So yeah, it's a good place to be at, but I think it's coming with its own set of challenges.
Yeah, thanks Amjad, for sharing that. And yes, economics and also policy measures, all those are supporting this surge in demand for solar. And of course, a lot of changes are still needed to actually harness the whole potential of renewable energy. Now I will shift the conversation towards energy efficiency, but we don't have much time. So yeah, I see that it is only 70 minutes. We have only 17 minutes left, but yeah. So, I mean, each panelist will have two minutes to address the question, but then we'll take some questions from Hoover. Yeah. So, yeah, again, to Amjad, I read the report that Pakistan has the potential to save USD 6 billion per annum by adopting energy efficiency and conservation measures. Whether there is any specific energy efficiency and conservation targets stipulated by Pakistan's draft energy efficiency plan, and do you think what are the measures actually could help the government to achieve that energy efficiency potential?
Yeah, so Pakistan approved its National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy in 2023, and it came with its own plan. So the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority in Pakistan is quite proactive in kind of dealing and bringing energy efficiency to the forefront. They're doing some wonderful job, but again, I think the problem with energy efficiency isn't really about coming up with policies and plans. It's about getting it implemented. And implementing energy efficiency, all of us here, it's never on the agenda, right? We can always talk about just add more capacity, just add more renewables, and you are said. But nobody wants to talk about energy efficiency in the same breath as capacity additions. And I think that essentially is because there's a whole behavioral change element associated with it. And then within Pakistan, the context is even more murkier because electricity is a federal legislative subject, but energy is a provincial subject. So that requires a lot of, role division and a lot of coordination between the provinces and the federation in terms of getting energy efficiency conversations rolled out. But again, I think the policy is quite well drafted. It has a plan of reducing around 9 MTOE of energy consumption by 2030. That amounts to around 35 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So that's a good target to have. Is it sufficient? Could we be more ambitious? Yes, I think Pakistan has committed to around 230 MTCO2e reduction in its unconditional part of the NDC. So there's definitely more space for that. But I think we prioritize the right sectors in terms of building, in terms of industry, in terms of transportation, agriculture. So I think the targets are there, the goals are there. It's about how do you go about implementing those. And then I think some of the work that has been done on the policy side. So we're already developing MEPS, so minimum energy performance standards. We're doing energy labeling. We have plans to mandate energy, management systems and energy audits for a lot of companies. So the conversations are happening, but I think, again, the challenge would be the implementation, but the opportunity is huge in Pakistan. Like I said, we have this whole 12 gigawatt of, cooling load demand, essentially. That is air conditions, that is basically fans. And this is a standard open and shut case of, DSM, demand side management, and better energy appliances and building designs. But these require a whole conversation of behavioral change that somebody needs to champion and pioneer.
Yeah, thanks for that. So now my question to Dr. Mojem. Bangladesh's target is to reduce 20% energy consumption per GDP by 2030. So how do you see that? I mean, whether, to what extent Bangladesh has progressed? It is already 2024, and what are the motivation? I mean, what are the motivating factors for different sectors to pursue energy efficiency?
I checked the IEA data, and interestingly, I found that the energy intensity point of view, there is very marginal progress. In fact, we all agree that from the demand side point of view, as just we heard from Pakistan's case, same here, is that we are very, very poor in demand side management. Though it is often said that it is rather easy to reduce the energy consumption by improving the efficiency than to actually phasing out one megawatt of electricity from the power by energy sector. So we couldn't actually target it much for that. But my point is rather different. And what we have actually noticed is that, as just we heard about the behavioral part, our organization did one study last year. And we found very interesting findings about energy consumption behavior at the household level. What we found that often households mention that they focus on energy saving issue or durability issue or the warranty issue. So these kinds of issues they mention, but while we actually check their energy consumption, we didn't actually found that in their energy consumption pattern. So often they mention it, rather they are actually using it as much as it is being afforded by them. So one question in the Hoover link that there are people, the consumers are not fully actually aware of reducing their energy consumption if the instruments and apparatus are better energy saving, but rather that has sometimes increased their energy consumption because of less energy used by the appliances. So there are some tricky issues in terms of households' energy consumption behavior. And same is also true. We found that often we thought that female are more responsive towards energy consumption. Maybe somewhere in some region it is okay, maybe it is right. But in case of Bangladesh, we didn't find much of the gender sensitivity in terms of energy consumption pattern. Both male, female are of same nature, whether it is in the rural areas or in the urban areas. So why I actually said that Bangladesh government has some program. on energy, improving energy efficiency, targeting the female households or the female female who are actually residing in the household. So I think we need to think of, or we need to better understand that what are the real factors for energy use or energy consumption efficiency point of view, and thereby need to design the programs. Otherwise, we may calculate some big potentials. For example, I have data that how big potentials are available at the household level. A household level, by 2030, Bangladesh has a potential for 6,000 gigawatt hour. Industry level, there is a potential for 4,000 gigawatt hour. Refrigerator, 5,600 gigawatt hour. So we can calculate those kinds of potentials, but unless and until we couldn't actually really touch upon the behavior, industrial energy consumption behavior or household consumption behavior, so we cannot actually grab those potentials. So we have to understand the behavior. We have to, thereby designing the overall programs. Particularly awareness, learning, education would be one kinds of programs, and definitely incentives and others are programs, but that need to be very well fine-tuned so that that can actually really get benefit of the process.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, behavioral change is important for energy efficiency and conservation. There is always a chance of rebound effect in energy efficiency. My question to Jyoti, what is the framework that helping BEE to achieve the tremendous improvement that we saw under the PAT scheme for energy efficiency? Could you briefly enlighten us? I mean, we don't have much time, only 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yes, Shafiqul, I will keep it brief. So PAT scheme, there are various programs and schemes that government has introduced for increasing energy efficiency across sectors, but the most successful of them is the PAT scheme, which is Perform, Achieve, and Trade. So basically, as part of this scheme, around 26 million tons of oil equivalent, which in turn relates to 70 million tons of CO2, is already been saved. And as part of this, you have to reduce specific energy consumption and increase energy efficiency in 13 high-intensive sectors, including iron and steel and cement and other sectors. So this is the main scheme. It was announced way back in 2010. There are already 6 cycles of this PAT cycle that has been there. But what we have heard from the industry that the targets given under this PAT program are a bit lenient. So to improve on that, I think the stringent targets and regulatory mechanisms needs to be implemented.
Thanks. Yes, target is important. That's all happening in Bangladesh also. Without specific target, sector-specific target, the energy efficiency gain actually we cannot measure. Last question, I mean, this is to Jay. Standards that play important role for energy efficiency. So what Australia is considering for this all-electric home and energy efficiency? I mean, is there any policy gaps, and how you feel that can be addressed?
Yeah, so we're lucky in the sense in Australia that we do have this existing scheme for appliance standards that's been around for quite a few years. But for various political reasons, really, it just hasn't had a lot of attention in a long period of time, and it's quite out of date. So it will provide, for example, labelling for certain types of appliances, but not others, and minimum energy performance standards for some appliances, but not others. However, we think there has been a bit more attention on this recently, and we do think this is actually a big opportunity to drive more efficient electric appliances and all-electric homes. And one of the reasons that led us to that conclusion was realising that as well as that 800,000 gas appliances that are installed every year, there are also another sort of 950,000 or so inefficient electric appliances that are also getting installed in their homes. And it turns out that actually in a lot of regions, if you were to upgrade all of those inefficient electric appliances to alternatives like heat pumps, that actually offsets the increase in electricity demand that you get from electrifying gas. So that could be a really, really significant step in sort of helping to manage that additional load from electrification. So we think improvements in that program could look like, yes, fixing those labelling gaps so that consumers can make really clear, informed decisions when they're buying appliances, so they can see what the relative cost of a gas appliance, for example, is versus various types of electric appliances. We think information is important for consumers to understand the risks that are emerging for some of those appliances. For example, if you were to buy a gas appliance today, that has an expected lifetime sometimes of up to 20 years. But with the various policy movements in different states, it's not certain anymore that a reticulated gas supply will be available 20 years from now. So we think that needs to be understood by consumers, and also potentially decisions made around whether it is valid to be selling some types of appliances like gas appliances when they don't really offer value to consumers, and they carry these additional risks, as well as, of course, we know the climate and the health impacts.
Yeah. Thanks. So I will conclude with some of my comments on standards, but before that, there is a specific question for Mustafa. Bloomberg reported that Pakistan's boom in solar home system, not solar, distributed system, solar system, was unrecorded. What does that mean? I mean, just briefly.
No, I think that's a good question. So, did it go unnoticed? Sam, I wouldn't really agree with that. I think there were the signals of those happening in Pakistan. It's just that the state is not actually, there is no mechanism of keeping track of how much solar is coming into the country. So again, the Bloomberg report, I wouldn't agree necessarily with the number. There's definitely over-invoicing happening to send money out of Pakistan. There's that crisis as well. Then I'm sure there will be some export happening to Iran and Afghanistan as well. So there's that market. And then this is trade data, right? So once you translate this trade data into solar panels, the number wouldn't really be 12 gigawatt. It'll probably be lower than that. But the signals were there, right? So in terms of when I said, when I talked about the agriculture sector, right? Over the past year, the rice cultivation in Pakistan went up by 22%. And why essentially did that happen? Why did all of a sudden all farmers decide to, cultivate rice? It's essentially because the main driving factor for rice cultivation is irrigation. And because of solarization of tube wells, all of a sudden water is now available for free. So signals were there. It's just that there's no documentation happening at a state level. The state numbers are somewhere around 2 gigawatt of net metering installation. These are the official numbers. It will probably be higher than that. Probably 3 gigawatt is our estimate. Talk about CNI, some 3 to 4 gigawatt of installation will definitely be there. Of the 1.5 million tube wells, more than half of it will be solarized already, despite the fact that some of the government drives are now currently starting. And then in terms of, those people who are basically off-grid, or even industry, for more than 1 megawatt industrial consumers, I think the number is probably higher than 1 gigawatt in terms of captive generation for solar panels. So again, there is no collected data per se, because again, data collection isn't that great, but the signals were there. And Pakistan's economy went up by, the GDP growth was 2% over the past 2 years, but the demand on the grid went down by 10%. So there is definitely something at play where, our economy is not at that stage where we are delinked to, energy consumption altogether. So the signals were there, it's just that there's no documentation happening of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So one last question, but I don't know who will address. How can we scale up DER and energy efficiency? What instruments that we can use? Who? Jay? Or?
I would just stop with that. So I think certainly what has helped from the Australian perspective is well-designed subsidies. So we really built up a rooftop solar installation industry from nothing over a very short period of time. Through the use of subsidies, and as I mentioned, even though those are now declining, still have very strong uptake. I think there's more we could be doing in the energy efficiency space, but yeah, certainly policies and supportive financing programs can help there.
Yes, so with this, I would like to conclude the session. But before that, some of my comments. Yes, certainly policies are important. For instance, energy efficiency standards and labeling. That is really important because while consumers purchase a product, let's say light, efficient refrigerator, or whatever. So if the standards is there, they would be able to identify the best one. Otherwise, due to information asymmetry, they may buy the appliance with poor quality. And that happens in Bangladesh. For instance, LED lights, those are also sold by the street vendors. So those don't provide neither the required lumen, nor it also does not have the required lifetime, and they also consume more energy. So standards and leveling is very important. And also, what BE has been following, and Bangladesh also have, and Australia also have some of the regulations related to energy audit and doing all those things. But there is one more interesting element to that, is having specific target for the sectors, not only having the policy 20%, 30%, but specific policy, time-bound policy, targets. You have to reduce 10% by 2020, let's say steel industry, cement industry. So having that kind of targets actually lead to sustained reduction in energy consumption. And in terms of DER, of course, as Jay have mentioned, and Dr. Moazzam also mentioned, Mustafa also mentioned, and all of the panelists have mentioned subsidy, that is important, and also conducive ecosystem for financing. Because making such kind of transition in a country like, let's say, Bangladesh, Pakistan, even in India, so that requires a sustained source of financing for a period, for a longer period, and that has to be very consistent with lower interest rate and easy to access option, and then the repayment mechanism that has to be also well designed so that it does not bring additional pressure to the consumers. So with these comments, with this note, I would like to thank you all for joining us, and please give a big hand to our excellent panelists. Yeah, thank you.